This is what I want to do tonight. I want to tell you, actually, it's not even to read. I want to tell you how to process is a better word, how to process an academic book really quickly and way better than you would do it if you read it like a regular person reads a regular book. And then I also want to do a quick history of Harvard. So that's sort of a little bit of the bait for tonight. And then absolutely shameless pitches for my classes. But first, a thank you. Thanks to Lindsay for the invitation and to the whole HESA board. I'm a super huge fan of HESA. I always encourage my students to join. And I love teaching extension. I taught in Harvard College for 3 years, actually 5 years if you count my time as a TF. But I want to use an old family metaphor. So DCE and extension, it's not like Harvard's older step siblings or the quiet ignored one. DCE is Harvard College's younger, better looking, more progressive, more technologically adept younger sibling. DCE, since its beginnings in the 1800s, has always been way ahead of the rest of Harvard, especially Harvard College. And we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. But anyway, here's the outline. So again, the main event is how to read a book in 4 hours. So without further ado, here we go. By academic-y, I mean like not a novel, something that you'd have to read for one of your classes. I developed this for history books, but it works for a lot of other disciplines too. And basically the fundamental idea, and Lindsay gave you the other title that I'd given her, how to rip the guts out of a book. That's sort of like zombies. Zombies are very similar to academics. Or rather, academics are like zombies. Why are academics like zombies? Academics are super slow. They're just slow. They all gang up. They're always moving in the same direction. And then this next slide's a little bit gross, so close your eyes. There's no real blood, I promise. Academics love big brains. That's their thing, right? And I want to have you think about both academic journal articles, like peer-reviewed journal articles, and books as sort of like zombie movie scripts. This is just one of George Romero's movies, but every zombie movie ever made is the same. Like the first 5 minutes, everything's cool. The birds are singing, there's flowers, people are interacting nicely, they're opening the doors for each other, and then all hell breaks loose. And there's zombies like ripping people's guts out. And some people go into a refuge, whether it's like an old cabin or a mall or a skyscraper or a boat. They flee, and there's always like a random assortment of people, right? And there's always a jerk. And you're sort of like, I hope the zombies don't win, but I kind of want the zombies to drag that jerk through the window, right? And like eat him. You're kind of like just waiting for the jerk to get eaten. And there's like the zombies break through where they can push back. And at the end of the movie, there's only 2 possible endings to zombie movies. Either the zombies kill all the humans or the humans kill all the zombies. It's just kind of always the same with cool variations. I personally love Dawn of the Dead, the remake, but they're all the same. And the point here is that academic articles in journals and academic books are kind of all the same. The structure is all the same. And if you know that structure, you can process them really quickly. And if you look at zombies in movies, right, they're not eating the ligaments. They want the really delicious guts and they want the brains. So you have to do the same thing when you process a book or an article. You can't get hung up on the ligaments or the tendons or the hair. You got to go right for like the kidney and the heart and the brain. So let's talk about how to do that. Back over to screen 2. The structure, like a structure of a zombie movie, is always the same. And it means you don't have to read the whole article or the whole book to really get it. In fact, if you read the whole article or the whole book, you actually will remember less. I know that's counterintuitive, but I'll show you. So if you have an academic book, this is one that I assigned that I really like by someone who was at Harvard for a little while, Cindy Ott. Super cool book. It's a history book. It's all about the pumpkin. Why do many Americans in fall drive 20 miles to buy a vegetable they have no intention of eating? This book talks about it. Really cool book, but you can't read this book. You need to process this book. So, I don't know, those of you who have taken classes with me, either unmute or just drop it in the chat. When you read a peer-reviewed journal article, the guts of it are the first 2 or 3 pages. And what sort of information do we want to get from that? What do we want from the first 2 or 3 pages? Let's see if I can get people to chat here or unmute, either way. Main argument. Thank you, Lindsay. Yes, the abstract. Oh, the abstract is like the kidney. Great. Thanks, Kim. Main argument is crucial. The abstract. What else? Think blue. Remember blue, my patented highlighter technique. Yeah, the objectives. Meta says the objectives. What are the main objectives? Lindsay says, who are they in conversation with? So I, as a historian, would call that the historiography. Every other discipline says the literature. What have other scholars written on this topic? The point is that when you read an academic article, all of that stuff is right at the beginning, and you got to slow down and focus in on that stuff, and then really read very quickly the rest of the journal article. And a book is very similar. This is what I'm taking notes on when I'm reading a journal article. I do not just like read the whole thing. I very intensively read the first 2 or 3 pages. I'm looking for the argument, which I think your expo classes refer to as the main thesis. So argument, thesis, historiography. Again, this is a history specific word. History is like Apple sometimes. Like they all have their own chargers in history, right? We're not going to play nice with all the other disciplines. So think of the literature review or the other literature. What is the evidence? If I'm a historian, is this person basing their argument on archival records from the 1700s? Are they basing it on daguerreotypes or old photographs? Are they basing it on the census? What's the evidence? Is this a sociologist who used a huge data set from the US government? Is it an anthropologist who did participant observation? What's the evidence? Who is the author? We all have computers in our pockets connected to like the entire knowledge of the universe. Who is this person? I always just Google the person, think like, is this an archivist? Is it someone who works in like a history museum? Is it a professor in a sociology department? What journal is it? So these are some basic things I try to get out of a journal, but when you read a book, it's a little bit different, just a little bit different. So how do you process a book? If you read a book, the first thing you do is logically pick up the book and open it up, right? So totally counterintuitively, don't touch the book yet. Don't touch the book. I have a PhD, right? I have a vague desire to go back to undergrad. I would be such a good undergraduate student now. I was such not a good undergraduate student because this is what I did. If I had a book assigned for a class, an academic book, not a fun book, I'd open up the book. I'd skip the introduction. I'd never read an introduction the whole time I was in college. Never. It's like the dumb stuff at the beginning. Why read that? And then I would start reading, and I would read the first sentence, and then the second sentence, and the third sentence, and the fourth sentence, just like I was reading a novel or War and Peace or whatever. And that is not how to process an academic book. You cannot read it like you would read a normal book while you're sitting on the beach or something. And you definitely can't skip the introduction. So first thing to do is don't touch the book. Just leave it over there on your desk. Just leave it there for a second and do this. First thing to do, get to book reviews. Book reviews are this like service thing that scholars do. They send you a free book. And at first, when you start out, you're like, oh, free book. And then you have to like read the book and write an intelligent synthesis of the book and review that's only about 2 pages long. And then it gets published in a journal. And guess what? Nobody cares. But it's really easy for academic books to find book reviews in journals. And they're usually about 2 pages long. So you find 2 book reviews, download them, print them out, you take notes on those. And those are great because they tell you what the main thesis is. They tell you, here I've said historiography, but I mean like, they tell you this author, who this person is arguing with in the academic world. They mention strengths in the book, they mention weaknesses. They often will say, hey, this is the best chapter. Okay, pay attention to that. Pay attention to that. So how do you do this? Those of you who know how to use Hollis well, you probably already know. But for those of you who don't, remember that Cindy Ott book I showed you the cover of a minute ago? Okay, put in Pumpkin Ott, her last name, review. That's it. Put it in Hollis, hit return. Right away, you get something like this. Notice it's in a journal, the Journal of Social History. it's about 2 pages long. Okay, great. And then if you look, the first 3 things that get returned are all Journal of Social History, Cultural History, the Journal of American History, and they're all like a page or 2 long. You can download 3 of these and read all 3. And really, after you read these 3 and take some notes on them, you're going to know a lot about the book. You haven't even touched the book yet. The book is literally lying there. You haven't even cracked the spine, and you know a lot about this book. If you've read 3 academic reviews that are 2 pages long, you know a lot about it. Okay, so what's the second part? If you don't have any time to read a book for a class, read 3 reviews. If you have a little bit more time, read 3 reviews and the introduction really well. And then if you have more time than that, you can do the rest of this. If you've read 3 reviews and then you read the book's introduction, you take good notes on it, you already know a lot more than someone who is now like in the middle of chapter 2. Yes, they have read more pages than you, but you know more about the book. There's no prize at all for reading pages. I can assure you. No prize. I've never won a prize. I won a prize for best award or best Harvard professor for HESA. That was cool. I never got an award for reading lots of pages. It's almost a negative thing because you get lots of details in your mind you don't need. So read the introduction. This thing about structure. Almost always at the end of the introduction, the author will say, first of all, they're going to say, here's my main argument. Then they're going to say, here are 5 people I'm arguing with. They'll say it in a nice way, though. And then they'll say, chapter 1 is about this. Chapter 2 is about this. Chapter 3 makes this argument. Chapter 4, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Next step. Just a show of hands for a minute. I'm going to stop this. Show of hands. People that have tons of time, like lots of extra time. They're sitting around on the couch. Anybody? Lots of extra time. Tons of extra time per week. Yeah, exactly. Because you're extension students. You're like people that have real grown-up adult lives and do all kinds of cool things. You don't have a lot of time. When you don't have a lot of time, you can't read every chapter. Just how it is. And so you need to select chapters. That for me was often just like chapter 1, chapter 3, chapter 5, chapter 7, and then whatever the last chapter was. You got to select chapters. When you select those chapters, you need to do the same thing as you do with an article. If it's a 25, 30-page chapter, you can only really read the first 2 or 3 pages well. And there's important stuff in the first 2 or 3 pages. Usually the author sort of sets up the chapter and says, okay, in this chapter, I'm going to do this. Read those well. After the first 3 pages, only read the first sentence of each paragraph. That's it. Just the first sentence, nothing more. I promise you, there is nothing in the middle of the paragraph, the second paragraph on page 172, that you need for your class. I promise you. This is the hard part. When you go back and start to take notes on the chapters, you can only take maximum 4 notes on the chapter. That's it. 2 to 4 notes. That's it. And then for those of you who walk in the orange pink light of Zotero, which maybe Lindsay could be a future spotlight, always take the 2 reviews, the PDFs of the reviews, or 3 reviews, your notes, and put everything in with the book on Zotero. So, quick review. Find book reviews first. Take notes on them. Try to figure out from the book reviews what the main argument is, who the author's in conversation with, like what other scholars are they arguing with, strengths and weaknesses. Read the introduction well. Take time with the introduction, really. Don't read all the chapters. Process between, 3 and 5. And don't take a ton of notes. 2 to 4 notes, that's it. Not long stuff. And then pull everything into your Zotero thing. I'm going to drop this into the chat in a minute here. I have a handout on how to do this, but I'm happy always for people to contact me offline too. Do not hesitate. George says, what is Zotero? Zotero is a fabulous thing. I'm going to leave it to maybe Lindsay or Kim. Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Lindsay. Zotero is a magical, magical thing, really. There's only one true path of citation, and it is Zotero. It will save you so much time. You can like take up a foreign language. So awesome. Yeah, maybe we'll do that in a future one. So let's just go through advantages and disadvantages. I really like to read, like probably most of you. I really like to read and I enjoy it. And I remember my first semester that I learned how to do this, having to process lots of books. And I was complaining to one of my friends from college and saying, "Oh yeah, it's not as fun anymore. It's not really aesthetically pleasing." And he was like, "Oh, poor you. You're in school and you get paid every month to read books, and you know it's not as fun as it used to be. I feel so bad for you." So yes, not as fun to read a book like this because you're not reading it, you're processing it. You're not like having a casual meal. You're hurriedly ripping the guts out of the book so you can move on to kill the next human and rip their guts out. That's the disadvantage. The advantages are this: you know the stuff about this book that you need to know. You know what scholars want to know about this book. I have never called up a friend of mine and said, "Brad, what's in the middle of the paragraph on page 172, the second paragraph down? Do you know? Like, what is that detail important?" No, it's not at all. If I call a friend and say, "Hey, you read that book by James Scott? What's like give me the main argument. Who's he in conversation with? What's that based on?" The stuff that a friend of mine who's a scholar is going to tell me is going to be the stuff that you'll get out of the book if you read this. You don't need to read the whole book. You don't even need to process the whole book to really be prepared to make good comments in class. This is the coolest thing. If you do this, you're going to have lots of good stuff. The professor's going to be like, "Oh, yes, that's exactly what I thought when I read this book." The other advantage of processing a book is that this takes way less time. Yes, you are not going to touch every single page of the book. You probably will only process about half of the book, maybe 2/3. It takes a lot less time. I want you, when you do this, the first time to set a timer, only 4 hours, no more. As soon as you get to 4, you're done. I don't care if you haven't finished the book, doesn't matter. You don't need to finish the book. That's the cool thing. And this means that by spending way less time with academic books, you can process a lot more. Now, some of you are feeling bad about this. You're like, "Oh man, I got to read every page. This is like cheating." I'm going to tell you right now. Here's some secrets. If you know someone that has PhD at the end of their name, they couldn't have gotten that PhD without knowing this technique. It is impossible to get a PhD if you don't rip the guts out of books like this. Can't do it, which is weird for me. You think it'd be like the first day of grad school they teach you how to do this, but they really don't. I also, Lindsay, I think now is the time for the ceremony. All of you, look at the screen. By the power invested in me by the Division of Continuing Education of Harvard University, I allow you all to not read every word on every page. You're absolved of any sin. There is no sin of not reading every word. You're absolved of any sin from now on, henceforth. Don't worry about it. And again, the first couple times you do this, it's a little clunky. The first time you ever try to kick a soccer ball 50 yards, it's difficult. You got to practice this. But if you practice it, you are going to get way more out of the book than if you read the book like you read a novel on the beach. Way, way more. So don't feel bad about this. It's better. You get more of what you need. Okay. Lindsay, can I toggle over to the Harvard history and then shameless plugs for my classes?
Definitely.
Okay. Any questions in the meantime about this technique? Yeah, Gabriel, go ahead.
What if I really want to read the books and they're like really good?
I forgot about the last slide. Hold on a minute. Here's the last slide of this part. Here it is. Ready? 1, 2, 3. You can always go back. You can always, over the summer, and of the books I processed in my second and third year of grad school, I probably went back and read 20 of them subsequently. You can go back and have that aesthetic pleasure. It's not illegal. But when you're trying to get through a semester, you got to process. You cannot read. Okay, I'm toggling back over. We're going to do some Harvard history, the
Would
fun
you
stuff.
like a story about applying this?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it, Lindsay.
Yes. So when I took your class, I think it was just a little over, I think it was a little over 2 years ago now. And we did this with that book, The Chosen. And afterwards, we had a discussion about it in class. And a lot of people said, I feel like I could have gotten, like really actually gotten it with just one more journal article. So I remembered that. So 3 is a good magic number. And one of the things that you shared with us in the class was that you when you started this technique, you were in a class and the things that were in those reviews were the things that you noticed somebody else in the class who was really smart and had all the answers was saying those things. You're like, I know what she's doing. I know how she's getting those answers. And so I remembered that, and I actually took a history class disguised as a government class for J term immediately following your class. So 3 weeks, and we had this huge history book to read. And I did this. I read 3 articles, and then I did the rest of the process, just took a couple of notes. And I had classmates who were saying, well, on page whatever and paragraph this, and so that. I was like, oh, they're doing it wrong. And I started talking about the things that I was reading in those book reviews, and the professors were saying, yeah, that's it, that's right. And so I think they were really impressed with the things that I had picked up from reading those book reviews. So this really does work, and you can use it for other classes, and you can do well in those other classes. I got an A in that J-term class. I think we had to write 3 papers in 3 weeks, and it was because I was able to get through that huge book in 4 hours before we even started the class. So I definitely recommend following this process.
Thanks for that, Lindsay. I remember it was the second semester I was in grad school, and I called my mom walking up Quincy Street, and I said, Mom, I'm like the dumbest person in 3 out of my 4 classes. And she's trying to be nice. She's like, well, what about the 4th one? And I was like, that's my independent study. I'm the only person in that class. So, I mean, I guess I'm the dumbest and the smartest. But I didn't know this technique until my 3rd semester. And when I started doing this, like Lindsay said, I remember being in a history class, and I had read the 3 reviews of the book. And I remember this other student being like, oh, well, it seems to me that this book, and whatever she said was exactly what was in the review. I mean, exactly, word for word. So yeah, you want to get out of the books the stuff that academics are really interested in. That's the important stuff. Textbooks, I don't know. I don't know about textbooks. It depends on how they're organized. I couldn't chime in on that. But peer-reviewed journal articles of almost any discipline. Okay, time for Harvard history. Radcliffe is 100% part of this. Okay, so do this. My guess is that you're picturing something like this. And these people were definitely important at Harvard. They were actually self-important as well. In fact, it's Teddy Roosevelt is in the middle of the front row. And I taught a course on Harvard history in the fall of 2019, and I was so irritated with what I read on the subject, I decided I was going to write my own book about it. I have a manuscript. I'm hoping now that Bloomsbury will pick it up and publish it. But these are some of the anecdotes from that book, and also what's in the class that I teach in the fall every year, Introduction to Harvard History. These men were servers in what now is called Annenberg in Memorial Hall. And I didn't really set out to write a revisionist history of Harvard, but what I found in my research is that there were a lot of people, and all different kinds of people, who made Harvard what it was in the past and also what it is today. And they might not always have been students, but they've always been part of this institution that all of us are part of. Guess what? There have been women at Harvard since 1636. And some of them were students at Radcliffe College. This college was associated with Harvard. And some of them were data entry clerks that worked at the observatory, the Harvard Observatory, in the late 1800s. These women doing data entry invented modern astronomy. I'm not exaggerating. Modern astronomy was invented by data entry clerk women at Harvard Observatory. Some of them had to challenge gender roles and fight for coeducation. There were Native people at Harvard at the very beginning. And basically, going through the archives, I found that no matter what you are or what you look like, there have always been people like you associated with Harvard, which is kind of neat. So I want to go through some of the older history of Harvard quick, and I'll do that just in a couple specific topics. So admissions, and then notice there's a D in here. Okay, cool. Think about what you had to do to get admitted to extension, to the degree program, if you're at that step. This is what you needed to get into Harvard in the first 250 years of Harvard. Had to know a little bit of Latin. You had to know as much Greek as I know French, which is as much to tell that cat joke. And then, of course, for Harvard, you had to have some money. You had to pay the tuition for 1 semester. And you can look at some cool old documents to see a little bit more about what Harvard was like back then. So this is called an admititor. And basically what happened was when you were admitted to college, to Harvard, well, you would go, there'd be a specific day you'd go, and one of the professors or one of the tutors or even the president for like hundreds of years, like the president did the admissions exam. They'd like give you a couple Latin sentences you had to translate, and they'd ask about Greek, blah, blah, blah. And if you were admitted, they'd give you the college laws, basically the rules for Harvard, and you had to copy them out on sheets of paper. And then at the very end, the president would write admititor, let him be admitted. But then, interestingly, in the 1700s, students also copied out these things called the college customs. These are basically like the informal rules for the students. And we can know a lot about what's going on in the early 1700s by trying to read these. Try to read the first one there. Can you read it? I'll read a couple of them to you. So number one is, read along with me. No freshman shall wear, they're not super sure how to spell here. No freshman shall wear his hat in the college yard, except it rains, snows, or hails, or he be on horseback, or hath both hands full. Number 6, no freshman shall talk saucily to his senior, or speak to him with his hat on. Number 9, a little bit about sports. Freshmen are to find the rest of the scholars with bats, balls, and footballs. Number 16, no freshman shall lean at prayers, but shall stand upright. And then my personal favorite, number 20, no freshman shall mingo against the college wall or go to the fellows' arsejon. So basically you can't pee on the wall around Harvard Yard, and you can't go in the bathroom for the tutors. We can learn a lot from rules, but we also, when you see rules over and over and over, you know that they were probably broken. So here's a rule from Harvard College, 1655. Okay, so no smoking, no drinking, and especially no drinking of hard liquor. And the cool thing is the written records tell us one thing. So here's the rule, but then you can go into the soil if you're an archaeologist and you can learn other things. And what we find is not only did Harvard College students smoke a ton, they also used the more expensive white clay pipes in the 1700s. So the written record says one thing, but then when we look in the archaeological record, it says another. Guess what? Harvard College students also drank a lot. They were drinking up a storm. What about playing? What about gambling? Seems pretty clear here. No gambling. And yet, when you dig around in Harvard Yard, and there's a class that does this, you find lots of old dice. So we know that probably wasn't true. Another thing I didn't include is a broken glass from liquor bottles. It's a great article. It talks about how there's a higher concentration of broken liquor bottle glass in Harvard Yard than in colonial era taverns. So the students are drinking more than people that are going to taverns. Some things never change. How about the dorms? Just take a minute and orient yourself. You're in the Cambridge Common. The building on the right is Massachusetts Hall. The building on the left has been rebuilt. It's no longer there. And the building straight on was ripped down in the 1700s. This is looking towards University Hall. Where the building in the middle is basically where the John Harvard statue and University Hall is. And the interesting thing is this building on the left, the old Harvard Hall, in 1764, it burns to the ground. And in that Harvard Hall was a kitchen and some classrooms, but also some student dorm rooms. And it's really cool because the students got reimbursed by the insurance company, basically, for all the stuff that burned up in the fire. And they had to make a list of what stuff was in their rooms. And so we have this really cool list of what was in their rooms. And I'll just read you some of them. A rough categorization of the objects listed by the students shows some surprising continuities with later dorm rooms. Furniture, clothes, books, things related to drinking and dining, personal hygiene products, and decorations are the main items. The majority of the specifically named things on the list were books. Students had Latin and Greek works like Cicero's speeches and Caesar's historical works, as well as English translations of the same. They had dictionaries and grammar books and magazines and almanacs, and in one case, a singing book. These were on bookcases, also on the list, and they were probably stored in trunks with padlocks. Both of those things appear on the list. The students didn't have common spaces, and so they had lots of chairs. It took me a while to figure this out. Some of the students had a half dozen chairs, and one even had 10 chairs in his room. In addition to the books, the students on this list to be reimbursed, they listed ink and ink pots, paper, and a pencil case. They had candlesticks and a candle. They had combs and brushes and razors and wigs and crisping irons. They had lots of hats, old hat, a beaver hat, and a square hat, as well as belt buckles, handkerchiefs, shoes. They were improvising cooking in their rooms and their fireplace. One had a chafing dish and a toasting iron. There were plates and cups and silverware. And guess what? Lots of booze, despite the rules. There were wine glasses, rum, and 3 punch bowls, and a small barrel of cider. And a number of them also had decorations like maps and glassed pictures. This list, made in 1764 for these students to get reimbursed, lets us sort of like go up to the window of this building in 1764 and peek through the window and look in student rooms. But in 1850, we get our first actual drawing. It's from a great book called College Scenes. It's actually on Hollis. You can look at the whole book, every page. It's drawn by a student right after he graduated. He did this sort of satirical book. We can get an idea of what student dorms look like. These buildings, Thayer and Weldon Matthews, you know all of them if you've been to the Yard. They had no central heating in an era when most elite Americans had central heating. This was a theory on the part of the Harvard administration that like being cold basically made you healthier and built character. Also, all of the bathrooms were in the basement and there was no running water. You had to go out to the pump on the Yard. There's some awesome pictures of student rooms. There's a huge stack of them in the archives. All this weird stuff. Some of these things you'd still see in a dorm room, other things not. If you've been to the Yard, you can see the John Harvard statue in the center background there in front of University Hall. You've probably seen this pump and been like, oh, that's quaint and nostalgic. I can assure you that anyone who went to Harvard in the 1860s and 70s, if they saw this pump, would not think of it as quaint and nostalgic. They would think of frigid mornings going out in the yard to pump water to take a bath. Not fun. In the early 1900s, rich Harvard students started moving off campus. And they started moving into these dorms, which were then private. Now, this now is Adams House, one of the houses. Back then, it was a bunch of different dorms. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, an American president, arrived in 1900 to Westmoreland Court. And in these dorms, these private dorms, they had running water and steam heat and staircases and libraries and even a swimming pool in one of these in Westmoreland Court. Super cool. We are way up above the Yard. Here's the Yard over here. Here's Widener. Here's Massachusetts Avenue. And down here, you probably have walked along the river and seen these river houses, these beautiful brick Georgian houses, right? Well, that area before was a working class neighborhood called Riverside. In yellow here, you see all these houses that were made out of wood. And Harvard alumni started buying them up secretly. And then they kicked all these people out of their houses, raised the houses down. So all the renters had to leave. All these working class people got kicked out. Talk about gentrification. And they built all the river dorms. So what is now an awesome, beautiful part of Harvard, the river dorms, was a working class neighborhood. All right, sports. Back in the early 1800s, until the mid 1800s, at the very beginning of the year in September, the freshmen would play the sophomores. Where in what was called the Delta. It's a triangular space where Memorial Hall is right now, out in front of the Science Center. And they would basically, all of the people in the class, so between 60 and 100 people, would just like try to kick the ball. Although you can see, again, from this satirical book, in the annual football contest, the sophomores kick the freshmen, and the freshmen strive vainly to kick the ball. We also have some other records about this. There's a Harvard librarian for 40 years, John Sibley. He has a great diary that is mostly filled with really boring stuff. But then every once in a while, we get little nuggets about the students. The administration bans football briefly in the 1860s, and so students start doing other stuff. They take these whaleboats that are very common and in use in the Boston Harbor, and students form clubs. Has nothing to do with the college. The college actually tries to get the students not to do this, and they start doing boat races. And this also happens at Yale. And so the very first sporting event between two colleges ever is on August 3rd, 1852, Harvard versus Yale. It's a boating race, what we now call crew. And Harvard won the initial heat, the informal heat. There were 3 boats from Yale and only 1 from Harvard. And then they shot the pistol and the boats were off and the Harvard boat took off. And there was a big log and the Harvard boat had to go around it. It took a little more time, but the Harvard boat still won. So on August 3rd, 1852, the first intercollegiate sporting event ever, and Harvard won. Yes. Interestingly enough, the Harvard team was dressed in white and blue, as the Harvard Crimson was not yet in vogue. Okay. Most of you are students. I guess all of you are students. And at some point, I hope you'll have the opportunity to go to commencement. Here's an old diploma. You should know that in the 17th and 18th century at Harvard, when you had commencement, you would get your degree, but you were not given a diploma. You probably think of these things as the same thing, but it's not. When you get a degree from Harvard, it's just like something recorded in some book. Whereas a diploma is sort of the official proof, but nobody really looks at that. So back in the day, you didn't even get a diploma because Harvard was a regional college. Like, it was pretty easy to figure out if someone actually graduated from Harvard, because if you were an elite person in New England, you could find out easily. Harvard, of course, had to get its due. And so even if you had satisfied all the graduation requirements, you still had to pay the commencement fee. That was £3, which was basically a year's tuition. So you couldn't actually officially get your degree unless you paid the commencement fee. Also, super cool, the day, because Harvard was a public school, by the way, until the 1820s. And so the day of commencement was like a big party. It was a day off of work all across New England. Lots of people came to Cambridge. People that graduated from Harvard were invited to the commencement. Every graduate was invited to commencement. And people who weren't involved with Harvard were across the street in the Cambridge Common, where there was picture like a county fair, but like a pretty raucous county fair. We have all these cool descriptions of them. I won't read through them, but there's people gambling and wrestling and playing dice and selling alcoholic drinks. And also, well, I'll read one quote. Here we go. Commencement day and on the nights that preceded it and following it, with drinking stands, dancing booths, mountebank shows, gambling tables, I've never heard such a horrid din, tumult, and jargon of oath, shows, screams, fiddles, quarreling, and drunkenness as on those 2 nights. Let's see. Here's another one. Sorry, I just can't resist. Gamblers gather around a wheel of fortune, jolly hucksters, displaying their tempting wares in the shape of cooling beverages and palate-tickling confections, a pantomime show, a blind man led by a dog, soliciting alms, organ grinders, hurdy-gurdy grinders, bears and monkeys, jugglers, sword swallowers, all mixed in inextricable confusion. But the cool thing is, in 1797, an elephant came to commencement, not to commencement, but across the street in Cambridge Common. The elephant's name was Old Bet, and it was 25 cents to see her if you were an adult, or 1/8 of a dollar if for children. And luckily, the graduates were not getting actual diplomas, because this broadside here, this advertisement says, don't bring any important papers anywhere near the elephant because it's destroyed many papers of consequence in the past. If you come to commencement, you will see, if it's not this guy, it's whoever is the current sheriff of Middlesex County. What the hell is the sheriff of Middlesex County doing at the Harvard graduation? He has a great time. He bangs this staff and yells, and he sort of opens the thing and starts the commencement. It's kind of funny. But the reason he's there is because back in the 1800s, there was all kinds of stuff going on across the street. There were a bunch of delinquents getting drunk and yelling and shooting off firecrackers. And so the reason the sheriff of Middlesex is always at the Harvard graduation is because before, the sheriff and 30 sub-sheriffs were there to make sure that all these ruffians didn't come in and interrupt the commencement. Okay, and a note about DCE real quick. Remember, extension, or DCE largely, is Harvard College is way more progressive, technologically savvy, more egalitarian younger sibling, right? 1871. In 1942, World War II forces Harvard grudgingly to let Radcliffe College women come and take classes. But DCE was letting women take classes in 1871. This guy right in the middle, the guy with the cool beard, Asa Gray, he's a professor of natural history. And he says, hey, I want to launch this summer school class on botany. So the president then allows him to do that. It's at the Harvard Botanical Garden. And crazy thing, guess who applies? A whole bunch of women. And Asa Gray's a pretty progressive guy. He wasn't surprised. But the Harvard administration can't believe that women would take science classes. Why would women take science classes? Asa Gray goes on to be one of these super important professors of natural history. He's a really prominent scientist. He's a friend of Charles Darwin. But he believes in women's ability to do exactly the same coursework as men. And this is the progressive part of Harvard. DCE. This is from 1918. It's cool, it's summer school. But guess what? It's not just learning inside the classroom. They're doing historical excursions to Lexington and Concord, to Bunker Hill. Sure, it's a little too focused on like the great white man history, but DCE already has the idea that learning is not just in a classroom during a class. It can also be a public lecture. It can be a really cool, well-done field trip. This is DCE in 1918. 1948, once again, open to women. This is the summer school from the very beginning. I don't know if any of you are in Boston, the WGBH. This is the Great Blue Hill is the GBH part of this. This first radio broadcasting station in New England is opened under, it's a part of what becomes Extension, the Cooperative Broadcasting Council. It's a consortium of schools, including Harvard, but it's basically Extension. Extension is doing televised courses for inmates at the Deer Island prison in the 60s. Students would watch these conferences and then they'd come out and take their exams at Harvard. This is a really progressive thing, and this is way before the rest of the country is doing this. Harvard is working with the US Navy in the 60s to do distance courses with people on freaking nuclear submarines. Some of you can imagine the sound that this device on the left makes. Harvard in 1980s is doing calculus with students in Beijing. There's a 5-week course on artificial intelligence. Where's that ever going to go? This was taught at Harvard Square at night, and Chinese students would take it in the morning. In the 90s, they're using this radical new technology, video cassettes. Awesome. And then finally, we get courses being put online. 2005, they start Harvard X. 2007, there were already 7,700 course registrations. And just a personal note, I remember going into some crowded room, actually, in Robinson Hall in March 2020, when the school had to close for COVID. And it was everybody in the history department, and we all crowded into a little room. Again, like in retrospect, it was probably not the greatest idea. And somebody from Extension, I don't remember who it was, but somebody from Extension came over and was like, okay, here's how you use Zoom. I think I'd been on Zoom like 3 times, and I'd never started a Zoom call or taught with Zoom. Extension taught the rest of Harvard how to do Zoom. Extension taught the rest of Harvard not just how to start a call, but how to be a good teacher online too. And it's really cool. That's a huge gift that Extension has given to the rest of our institution. Okay. I think, is that the last slide? I think so. Let's see. Oh no, shameless plugs. How can I forget the shameless plug? Then I promise I'll finish, Lindsay. Or shamless plugs. That could also be shameless plugs. I don't know. Probably spell check these before I put them up. So here's the class I mentioned before.
It's the original spelling, right? From the 1600s?
That is, yes, Lindsay, that is correct. You remembered that important lesson on how to spell shameless. This class is actually like a bait and switch because all of my classes are how to do college. That's my game. I'm never going to be the like super famous Harvard researcher, like discovering new DNA techniques or whatever. But my game is to tell people, to teach people how to do college better, how to rip the guts out of an academic book, how to read a research article in 20 minutes, how to use Hollis better. I always have research librarians come into my class, do presentations. How to write a paragraph. Like, I never learned how to write a paragraph. I never really learned the structure of a research paper. All these things are important, and I do all of them in my Introduction to Harvard History class. You're going to learn, of course, some more of the stuff we talked about tonight, these fun anecdotes, how to write a research paper. There will be plenty of digs on cats, if that's your thing. And also, you will have the, I would say, the privilege of interviewing a past alum of DCE and transcribing that person's oral history. The cool thing about this is, and those of you who have done this class know, when you do an oral history, it's not just the other person who is the author. You are also the author. I mean, you're asking the questions, you're doing the follow-ups. And so when it goes into the archives forever, it's not just the interviewee who is listed as an author, it's also you. This is your chance to be in the Harvard archives forever, which is kind of cool. It's a neat part of the class, I think. And then secondly, my other class in the J term.
Are you teaching this summer?
No, I don't do summer classes. So you don't learn how to plant more potatoes, but you do learn a lot about the politics of urban agriculture and how to use Hollis way better. Of course, jokes about felines and more of these other sort of Jedi techniques. Cool. Lindsay, I think I stayed within time, right?
Yeah, no, we're good. And Gabriel's had his hand up for a little bit, so
Gabriel.
I don't know.
Okay,
Go for
so
it.
I did the reading for the class, and I'm going to retake Harvard history, but I just wanted to know if you had any recommendations for any books about the topic. I know there's trillions of books, there's a lot of information, but The Chosen and Philology are like wonderful books, and I just love the topic.
Drop me an email and tell me the specific parts you're most interested in, because there's like a really cool book about the anthropology, or sorry, the architecture of Harvard, but there's like a million of them, and I have a long a proposal for my book that talks about all the different books on Harvard.
Okay, so just
Yeah.
shortly, it's the game is what we were talking about. The game is really what I'm in.
Awesome. If anything else I mentioned tonight, if you want like my handout on how to write a good paragraph, or like the structure of a research article, don't hesitate to just drop me an email and say, hey, I'm interested in some of the stuff you talked about. Can you send me some of it? And I am, if you're in my class, you have like lifetime office hours with me and Zotero help. But if you're not in my class and you're just interested, just drop me an email and say, hey, can we jump on Zoom and just talk about, I'm starting out my career at Extension. I want to like know some of the techniques. I'm always happy to talk to Extension students. I really am. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you all of you for coming. Thanks to Hessa for being awesome.